Hello.
Welcome back to the Space School of Wisdom's PPSW, your favorite hangout place. Today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we're going to visit something that happened in the canon, but we're changing it around a little. While Qui Gon approached Vader as a Force ghost, we're going to dive deeper and find out what Qui Gon Jinn could have done for the boy he was supposed to train. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of the Pente Patrol team. If you want a chance to win in our next giveaway, watch to the end of the video and I will tell you how. Our story begins in the middle of somewhere and nowhere, within the realm of the living Force itself. Qui Gon has been dead for 13 years, and on the twilight of life and death, he lived. Qui Gon sat idle within the living Force after trying to teach Yoda the ways of the Force itself. Sure, Yoda showed that he was behind it, but it didn't mean that it would change anything. Qui Gon watched the uptight, overly conservative Grand Master loosen up his ways and begin to realize the galaxy around him was crumbling. The Jedi were failing, and Grand Master Yoda would be the first Grand Master in generations to watch the Jedi Order crumble out from beneath his own feet. Yoda, by the end of the Clone Wars, understood what was wrong, and he tried to correct his errors, his ways, but he needed to be doing that 13 years before, when the child from Tatooine was brought to Coruscant. Anakin Skywalker had the ability to sustain the Jedi or destroy them, and the Force itself was now at a balance. The choices Anakin made on Mortis only solidified his destiny into peril and destruction. He was warned about his wife, and he was warned about the increasing power of the dark side in the galaxy. While Qui-Gon never made his way to Anakin during the corresponding years, he knew of what Anakin did to the Tusken Raiders on Tatooine. Even Yoda could hear Qui-Gon calling out to Anakin, but it didn't matter. The dark side already wound itself into his veins. Qui-Gon had been existing in this realm, and he traversed it quite well. But there was something incredibly wrong. The Force itself was crying out for help because the balance was truly dead. There was near nothing that could save the Force from one individual, led by the most evil man in the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker, now Lord Vader, tore through the Jedi Temple, killing everyone inside without hesitation and without mercy. Qui-Gon was too late to try and speak to Anakin. While being a Force ghost was something relatively new to Qui-Gon, he did understand one thing. He knew that it was incredibly difficult for him to come to the living, because he was dead. He had no pain, no suffering. But whenever he wanted to return to the land of the living, he had to endure a great amount of emotional and mental heartache. Qui-Gon felt the pain, and he searched for Anakin. He knew it was too late, but he knew he might have a chance to rectify things if he returned to Anakin, maybe even guide him away from this dark cloud that lived within the Force itself. Qui-Gon looked down, and he was there. He looked around, and he was surrounded by hell itself. Sulfur plagued the air so badly Qui-Gon himself could have even struggled to breathe while being dead. The sound of explosions and lava raining down across the skies could be heard. Qui-Gon looked around as he then heard the clashing of lightsabers before turning around to see a Jedi with his back to a massive volcano that was surrounding him. And then, on a small platform, he saw him. Anakin Skywalker had fire in his eyes and hate in his heart. He spoke to this Jedi as Qui-Gon came to soon realize it was Obi-Wan Kenobi himself. But before Qui-Gon could speak or make himself apparent to either of the two of them, he watched 3 limbs tumble into the lava river below. And Obi-Wan watched his pupil tumble down to the bottom of the lava bank below. Qui-Gon walked over the hill and looked down at Anakin, who was on the bottom of the bed. Qui-Gon decided to make himself visible. He wanted to rectify this. He needed to fix this. While Anakin couldn't be saved here and now, maybe he could sow the seeds of hope, or maybe he could even tell Anakin to let go and become one with the Force like he was. Qui-Gon could save him here. It would be better of a fate than what would become of him if he were to be put back together as some machine. Qui-Gon heard Obi-Wan speaking, as Qui-Gon then walked down into the small lava bed to see Anakin. Qui-Gon's blue aurora surrounded him, as Anakin caught a glimpse. All Qui-Gon could say was,
"I'm sorry, Anakin. I know I failed you. Please, let go of your hate. I can free you from this pain."
Anakin's rage-filled eyes released a blood-curdling, directed towards Qui-Gon Jinn. Obi-Wan on the top of the lava bank swelled with tears in his eyes after pouring his heart out to his former student, telling him how much he loved him, and he truly believed that Anakin now hated him. After all was said and done, though, he figured that, in the end, it made sense. But Obi-Wan couldn't watch anymore as Anakin caught fire and exploded into flames before Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's eyes. They watched Anakin burn to a crisp as Obi-Wan abandoned his student and took his lightsaber too. There was more darkness coming, and Obi-Wan needed to make sure Padme and her child were going to be okay. Qui-Gon was slightly disappointed in Obi-Wan for leaving Anakin, but as Qui-Gon walked down the bank where Anakin was burnt to the bottom layer of flesh, he felt every memory of the atrocities Anakin committed. Qui-Gon saw Windu thrown from the window. He then saw Anakin slaughter dozens and dozens of younglings. The pain for Qui-Gon was even worse than returning back to the land of the living realm. Qui-Gon tried to speak to Anakin, who was solely focused on climbing this hill. Anakin was willing to do anything to save his wife, and while Qui-Gon hadn't fully discovered the reason for all of this, he soon would understand Anakin's determination. Qui-Gon knelt down to Anakin's level, as the boy he saved from slavery continued climbing, with burn scars all across his face and cemented into his soul. Anakin climbed with one limb, his mechanical arm. Qui-Gon spoke up.
Anakin, please stop. This is no way to carry on. Let go of your anger.
Leave me alone.
This isn't you, Anakin. Let go. Please.
Get away from me. You abandoned me. Qui-Gon looked down at Anakin as he felt the eminence in the Force rise from over the hill, as Anakin rolled over onto his back and sighed as if he were saved. Qui-Gon then saw a dark hooded man with crumbled skin as he descended onto Anakin. Sidious leaned down and made sure Anakin was okay, before dispatching his troops for a medical capsule. While Anakin felt like Sidious was the only one to care for him other than Padme, he realized his thinking was right when Sidious was the one who came back for him, rather than Obi-Wan at least. Qui-Gon couldn't watch anymore, as he disappeared from Anakin's sight. Anakin lay on the ash and sit as he saw the blue ghost of Qui-Gon disappear, as his new master waited by his side for the medical capsule. Qui-Gon was rather heartbroken, but he felt a call from another as he traveled to Polis Massa to meet the grand acquaintance of Grand Master Yoda. Qui-Gon, to an extent, was happy to see that Grand Master Yoda was still alive, but the burden and heaviness of losing an entire Jedi Order was present both around Yoda's essence, and it was written on Yoda's face. He was meditating alone in a room. It overlooked the space around him and the small little moon base that he was on. Yoda felt the Force crumble as he heard the voice of Qui-Gon.
Master?
Master Qui-Gon!
Yes, it's me, Master. It's time for you and Obi-Wan to further your training in the Force. You must train him on how to commune with me.
Yoda nodded his head as he looked over to see and hear Bail Organa calling out his name. Master Kenobi had arrived, and while the events would continue to transpire into the direction of normal canon, Qui-Gon would oversee the birth of the twins and the death of Padme Amidala, before realizing the completion of Darth Vader was happening across the galaxy. For the time being, Qui-Gon would spend his days around Anakin. If there was any chance for him to return, any possibility that he might come back to the light side of the Force, Qui-Gon knew that this was the only way and how it had to be done. Of course, there could be other possibilities, but Qui-Gon would be a fool not to take advantage of how fragile Anakin's mental state was at this point. For Anakin, he spent copious amounts of time within Bacta tanks, reliving the past 24 hours of his life. He had everything, and then he lost it all. Everything was a lie, a manipulation, and yet he just couldn't see it. Anakin went from being a general of one of the best divisions in the clone army to painting the inside of a water tank. He was on the Jedi Council, and sure, Anakin hated the Jedi more than anything right now, but he at least had respect. People looked up to him. He was a hero not just to the Jedi, but to the galaxy. He was someone that everyone looked up to, but he lost his wife, his master, his apprentice, his friends, everyone. Anakin was dead. Vader was all that remained. At least in his own mind, of course. Of course, there was that little bit of good that was still inside of him, that Padme believed was there. But Qui-Gon himself was even a bit skeptical. Qui-Gon also had much more to learn about the Force itself. He was interacting with the wills of the Force, and he wasn't sure about what else he had to learn about them. The Force was much more powerful than the concept of good and evil. Much like any great civilization, the Jedi and the Sith took something so grand in concept and brought it down to their level, so that they could understand it. Qui-Gon knew that the Dathomir witches and the Barad-dûr sages had a much more expansive view on the Force, much more than the Jedi or Sith had, because the Jedi existed within the Force and limited themselves to it, while the Sith, on the other side, were a plague to the Force, and their use of it harmed the Force, which it only made sense why they consistently killed each other off. Qui-Gon would only have to search for Anakin a great deal. It would be difficult. He hadn't associated the presence or name of Vader with Anakin yet. They were still not the same in his own eyes. And there was only a very tiny sliver of good that was still able to be seen within Anakin Skywalker. It would actually take weeks for Qui-Gon to be able to discover the location of the now Darth Vader. Qui-Gon was able to find Vader inside of the medical complex on Coruscant. It was an upper-class facility used by the Chancellor himself, now crowned Emperor of the Galactic Empire. Vader was being kept inside of the massive prison unit until the Emperor felt it was appropriate for him to be released into the galaxy. There were a lot of massive shifts in the political and galactic sphere. The clone trooper program was immediately being scrapped, and everything else under the sun was changing rapidly. Palpatine had a lot to focus on, so he kept his new pet locked away. Vader sat inside of his bacta tank, reminiscing. Maybe he was dreaming, or maybe it was something else. All he knew is that he was sitting dormant, not doing anything, just floating lifelessly in the bacta tank. Qui-Gon saw what had become of the boy he foresaw to be the Chosen One. While Qui-Gon believed that there was an opportunity for Vader to become Anakin and redeem himself, he thought that maybe he should just try and pry the broken man. Try to see if somewhere inside of him he wished for redemption. Because Anakin Skywalker was not a weak man, forged from slavery on the same planet that his former master was currently waiting. Qui-Gon may have the opportunity to right the wrongs of his own past, but there was always the slight fear that in Qui-Gon's mind, he didn't know if being a Force ghost was an extended period of time, or if he could just end up vanishing into the Force or not. He was a first, and there was no one else, at least no one present to teach him other than the Wills. The Wills suggested against reaching out to Anakin, because they believed in the will of the Force. And while Qui-Gon did too, he understood that Anakin had much more to offer than just be the hulking beast now known as Darth Vader. There was much more to his story than being an eternal slave to the dark side. Qui-Gon knew he had messed up. He knew he should have spoken to him many times, but specifically when he was alone in the council chambers on that fateful night when everything changed. So much Qui-Gon could have done by just speaking to Anakin, but if Anakin told him anything, it was that he wouldn't listen to anyone but his emotions, if the time came to choose between the two of them. He didn't acknowledge Qui-Gon when he slaughtered the Tuskens, but maybe here, Qui-Gon could rectify the wrongs that he and both Kenobi had done. Kenobi wasn't ready to train the boy, but Qui-Gon knew that the Council wouldn't accept Anakin under any other circumstances. There was no reason for Obi-Wan to feel guilty for it, even though he would, and did. Qui-Gon knew he placed Obi-Wan in a bad position, and, at that, an unlikely position to succeed. Regardless, Qui-Gon made his presence aware to Skywalker, who seemed to be sleeping. Qui-Gon traveled into the mind of Skywalker, as he watched the dreams of Vader. There were desolate landscapes, and there was a complete lack of anything with life. Vader walked down an empty corridor. He still had his limbs, and he wasn't burnt. Vader still saw himself as Anakin. Down a little ways was Padme. She was standing, looking down into a fire pit. Anakin began running, crying out her name. It was the voice of Anakin Skywalker, not Vader. As he kept running, he felt slowed down as he watched his legs fall into pieces on the floor beneath him. Kenobi rose from the floor and looked down at his apprentice, as Padme fell down into the lava river down below, and the last thing that Anakin heard was a voice of Kenobi saying, "Anakin, it's time to let go." He tried to speak up, but he was burnt to a crisp, with a respirator covering his face as he awoke inside of the bacta tank. His skin shivering, chilled inside of the cooling waters, Anakin opened his eyes as his mind drew blank. He had nightmares before, but he used to be able to wake up and rub his eyes and feel some sort of comfort. He had nothing like that anymore. He was scarred. He was just a hunk of meat. He was no longer a man. Vader felt a familiar presence, that of Qui Gon Jinn, and his anger began to boil. But then he heard the voice of Qui-Gon.
Anakin, It's not your fault. Don't blame yourself. You can come back from this.
Anakin couldn't speak. With the respirator on, but the physical movements showed a man who was bursting with anger, ready to tear down an entire city, no, a planet, because of that anger. Anakin's rage at this moment was nothing like what he had on Mustafar, but his rage was rising.
Don't let the anger control you. Remember what I taught you. Trust in the Force.
Vader's rage seethed as he outstretched what little he had of arms and blasted the glass around him into oblivion. The water trickled down and out onto the floor. Qui Gon watched as Vader hung suspended in the air as the respirator dropped it down from his face and anger seethed out of his mouth. He looked around as his bloodshot eyes were covered in a yellow tint. Qui Gon watched as the little that was left of Anakin vanished into Vader as lines of rage bursted out. "You abandoned me. I will not go back. I hate you." Qui Gon looked at the boy as he hung suspended and tried to catch a glimpse of reality that now beset the Chosen One. Anakin Skywalker no longer seemed to be in there. Qui-Gon believed he was the Chosen One, though, and still believed this. But how could someone so vile, so angry, and so distraught be able to be turned back? Qui-Gon closed his eyes as he watched an evil eminence walk through the door, with an evil frown dropping down the sides of his cheeks as he said,
"Lord Vader, what have you done?"
Vader hung there momentarily. He thought, and then looked up at his master. He didn't say a word. He just hung quietly, without a word to say. Sidious hissed at his apprentice as he turned around and walked out of the room. 2 royal guards walked into the room and walked up to the Dark Lord of the Sith, so weak and fragile. The guards moved to either side of the Sith Lord as they motioned themselves to pick him up and place him on the table next to the Bacta tank until a new tank could be installed. As the guards reached their robes up and they tried to grab Anakin off the hilts he was attached to, he lifted them off the ground. Vader snapped both the necks of them and he smiled. Their lifeless bodies were pulled above the ground and then dropped immediately. Vader then closed his eyes as a dark suit began forming beneath the little bit of legs he had left. Vader then pulled his arms up to his suit and then turned around as he ripped off the hilts and turned up as the body armor built up around him. The Dark Lord of the Sith was growing in his anger, and Qui-Gon could feel it. He watched as a man named Anakin Skywalker was covered by the black abyss of Vader. The light, the little tiny bit of light he had left within him, vanished when the suit landed on his scarred and charred body. Without a moment's notice, the suit covered any light, and the face of Skywalker was submerged by the lifeless breathing of the mechanical beast known as Darth Vader. One powerful footstep after another. The clinking of boots echoed throughout the small room as Vader opened the door and found his master waiting for him there.
"Ah, Lord Vader. I thought Kenobi broke your spirit. It appears I was wrong."
I am not broken. I am reborn.
"Good. Well then, it's time to focus on the building of our new empire."
What is thy bidding, my master?
The door slammed shut, and Qui-Gon slowly disappeared from the realm he was in. Returning to the Force, he realized how wrong everything was. Maybe looking after Kenobi or even Yoda would be a better idea for him. There was little hope that they could start their training, or better yet, they could face Vader or Sidious. Maybe, just maybe, this could all be undone. Qui-Gon returned and found the Wills surrounding him. They all warned against going back to the land of the living, because the will of the Force would guide every action that Anakin would take. There was nothing he could do to prevent or change the future for Vader. Jinn looked at the Wills. He knew that it was his fault. He never should have died. He should have been more patient and waited for Kenobi back on Naboo. There was no chance for Jinn to save Anakin, but within his soul he knew that there had to be something he needed to do. Something he could do at least. Qui-Gon would travel to Dagobah to see what Yoda was doing. He didn't make it apparent to Yoda that he was there. He was drastically depressed by what condition he found Anakin in. He didn't really want to disturb Yoda either. Yoda was searching around the swamplands as he found himself some food and dragged it back to his little makeshift hut. He made himself a home here, and he was simply just reforming to a life of simplicity. Because if he continued using the Force, he would be found by the Empire. Instead, he would wither out here, alone, on a swampland planet, by himself. Qui-Gon found this nearly as depressing as the downfall of Skywalker, so, Qui-Gon left Dagobah and went across the galaxy to the planet of Tatooine, searching for the former apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He eventually did find him in a cave of a Jedi hermit, another depressing tale of the downfall of the Jedi. Qui-Gon looked at Kenobi, who was sleeping. Qui-Gon knew he would regret this, but he looked into the mind of Kenobi. Nightmares, as his skin crawled and jumped back and forth on the hard rock he slept atop of. Qui-Gon could see everything as he watched younglings be slaughtered, and Padme too. At the end of it was Anakin screaming out in pain as he tried to stop from being burned alive. Obi-Wan jolted from his sleep as he turned over and sat up. Every night over the past few weeks, since the fall of the Republic, Obi-Wan had been plagued by nightmares. Obi-Wan couldn't escape this fate. The Jedi and he couldn't help but feel guilty for everything the Jedi became. He put his hands on his face as he tried asking for help, asking for any sort of guidance from his former master. Obi-Wan spoke quietly, almost entirely under his breath, as he did every night. "Master, please, I need your guidance. I cannot escape this, so I live with it." Qui-Gon looked down at his apprentice and knew that he needed more time until he would reveal himself to his student. The time, though, was not now. Obi-Wan needed more time, more training. His faith was broken, and so was that of his will. He no longer wore a Jedi robe, and he looked as pale as a ghost. For living on a desert planet for multiple weeks and months, this was rather uncommon to be that pale. Kenobi, too, had a depressing outcome. Qui-Gon returned back to the living Force, and pretended it never happened. The Whills surrounded Qui-Gon again, telling him that the will of the Force must be trusted. The guidance of the Force was in the hands of Anakin, and they were thrown away. Qui-Gon knew of Anakin's journey to Mortis, but couldn't help but feel guilty for not having reached out to the boy. Everything had gone so wrong, and the Whills kept insisting that it was all within the control of Anakin Skywalker to change those things, to fix the issues that were created. Qui-Gon believed in the Whills, but didn't understand how it was possible that Anakin could have fixed this at all. The Whills continued telling Qui-Gon that every time Anakin had a decision, he chose the wrong option. Falling in love with Padme never helped him. Slaughtering the Tuskens on Tatooine never helped him. Following the dark side of the Force throughout the Clone Wars and at the crest of everything, leaving Mortis, when the Ones warned him of what was to come if he didn't stay on Mortis and sacrifice himself to the Force. When Qui-Gon tried to speak up, he was silenced. The Whills told him that no matter the excuse or the benefit of the doubt he could be given, every opportunity Anakin had to become a vessel of the Force and allow it to naturally pass through him, unlike a Jedi and unlike a Sith, he allowed himself to be controlled by their ideals. It is why he lost his wife. It is why he killed his order, and it is why he was left to die on the lava beds of Mustafar by his master. Qui-Gon quietly thought, and under his breath asked,
"So Anakin was meant to suffer?"
The Whills disagreed. They expressed to him that the life of Anakin was to bring balance to the Force. He was created by the Sith, and the Force reciprocated that by creating one to bring balance to the Force. And Anakin was manipulated to destroy the Force, destroy the balance, destroy anything. Before the war, there was balance. Before the Jedi and the Sith, there was balance. When the Jedi sat at the crux of power in the galaxy, there was still balance. Between the Barrando sages, the witches of Dathomir, and the Jedi, there was balance. The Sith thrive off of the imbalance, and that imbalance bore Darth Vader. The Force itself would heal itself naturally, but Qui-Gon needed to trust that the Force could do that. Of course, Qui-Gon never wanted to let Anakin suffer, or leave his friends behind, but he agreed to listen to the Whills, and stay out of things. The Force was distraught, and the fabric of everything that had been established for thousands of years was gone. The Sith had a foothold on the galaxy, and with the Jedi spread out very thin, with very little members who could even dream about even standing up to the might of Vader, let alone the Empire, well, they would be slaughtered. Qui-Gon, being a part of the Force, could feel the pain of the Force, the wounds that the Force was creating in response to the massive downtrodden turn it took with the rise of the Sith. Qui-Gon could feel every ounce of suffering, and while he was no longer living, when the Force hurt everything that of the Force it hurt as well. To an extent, the Force and those within it, such as the Whills, almost wanted Anakin to suffer because of what he did to the Force. No matter the manipulation or the lack of training, he was hurting the Force consistently. As the first few months of the newly established Empire, dragged by the Foundation, began to grow, the few months turned into a few years. Vader turned himself around and found himself a new home on Mustafar. Though during this first trip back to Mustafar since losing Kenobi, he would find himself a new reign and struggles. On the planet, he would be introduced to an ancient Sith Lord named Lord Momin, and he would also re-encounter Qui Gon Jinn. While Qui-Gon said he would stay away from Anakin, he knew that this would be the opportune moment to try and turn him around on a path to betterment. Lord Momin would begin to try and coax Vader into almost a slave, just as was the way of the Sith. Vader would traverse into the caves and caverns, trying to find the answers to what Palpatine promised before Anakin became Vader. Darth Vader was looking for a way to bring back his wife from death, and the opportunity was through someone named Momin, or so he thought. Vader had very few interactions with Lord Momin during his stay here on Mustafar, but after a serious dream sequence involving an apology to his former master, the slaughtering of the entire Jedi Order, and seeing Palpatine next to his mother and also other countless confusing moments, Vader sat on a line between redemption and downfall. With Lord Momin leading him astray, only Qui-Gon could set him back on the right path. Qui-Gon made himself present in a cavern on Mustafar, where Vader and Momin talked. Momin was winding his way into Vader's head. Vader was believing everything that he heard and was becoming even more so a pawn of the Sith. Out of the shadow of voice he heard, as Vader continued listening to Momin and then stopped. Vader turned around trying to find the source of sound. His eyes landed on the Force apparition of Qui Gon Jinn. Vader grabbed his lightsaber from his hilt as he swung down at Qui-Gon, missing him entirely.
What kind of sorcery is this?
I don't know, Lord Vader. It could be a trick.
It is no trick. Only the living Force, Anakin. Do not call me that. I am no longer Anakin Skywalker. It is the name of your true self. Do not act like you forget. Don't pretend to believe this Lord Momin can offer you the same thing Sidious cannot.
Don't listen to him, Lord Vader. It's a trick.
Silence, Momin. The dark side is more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Is that what Sidious believes? Or what you believe? There is no belief, only truth. Then why has a Jedi found the path to longevity when the Sith have not?
Vader, he is trying to deceive you.
I said silence, Momin. What do you mean, Qui-Gon? I mean that the Force itself is more powerful than light or dark. The ones on Mortis promised you this. You can still resolve this. What did you say? I'm one with the Force, Anakin. I told you years ago to trust in the Force. Let it guide you, not destroy you. There's still time to be who you were meant to be.
Don't listen to him, Vader.
Enoch!
Vader reached his hands up and crumbled down the caverns on top of Momin as he raged and threw boulder after boulder, clearing out a new exit and leaving behind nothing of Momin's altar and grave, ridding the dark disciple from existence as the final howl of the deceased Sith Lord rang out of the caverns. Vader walked forward and looked over the mountains of volcanic ash in the cloud that was Mustafar. Qui-Gon made himself visible as he walked over and stood next to Vader. The breathing was all that could be heard over the sound of the volcanoes exploding and dying out across the surface.
Is it really true? I've never lied to you, Anakin. I never would. The Force is more powerful than you could possibly imagine. So much wrong has been done. Do you believe it can be fixed? I know it can be, as long as you accept the Force as your guide. What must I do? You must travel to the furthest and most distant place in space that you can find, lost amongst those same stars you looked up to as a boy. When you are lost, trust the Force. When you feel like there is nothing, trust the Force. When you don't believe in the ability to be saved, trust the Force. There you will find Mortis, and there the wills will begin to rectify the darkness. You will be able to bring balance to the Force, Anakin. Only if you trust the Force. What about Padme? She no longer lives, but through her, two beings exist. Ones that are the perfect makeup of her and their father. You will be able to do her justice and bring peace to the galaxy. And remember, while she may be gone, she will always be with you.
Vader sighed. His breathing stopped. He turned around and looked at the blue apparition of Qui Gon Jinn. Vader's eyes were weak under the mask, but Jinn could see through them. Qui-Gon could see the pain that Anakin was hiding. He could tell that Vader was no longer. Anakin was all that existed within. While it was important for Anakin to go to Mortis, that didn't rectify things in the galaxy. The Empire was still at large, the Jedi were still outlawed, and the Emperor, the most powerful Sith in generations, was still at the helm. His evil projects had just begun. There were very few Jedi in the galaxy who could even imagine standing up to him, but if they came together and united, they could destroy the last Sith. While Vader wasn't fully convinced, the fact that there were 2 children involved changed everything. As he started making his way back to his ship, he asked Qui-Gon,
You mentioned 2 children, Master Qui-Gon. I did. That's because you have a son and daughter. I know you were told differently by your master, but he has lied. Just like he did when he promised you the pathway to immortality. It wasn't your fault. He twisted an entire government, an entire Jedi Order, an entire galaxy into believing a lie. I would like to kill him. Remember, Anakin, revenge is not the will of the Force. You must trust that the Force will expunge him from existence. Trust the Force, Anakin, like you did.
Darth Vader turned around and looked at Qui-Gon. He paused, a moment passed, as neither of them said a word. Vader looked down, as his breathing continued without pausing. Qui-Gon knew that Vader wanted to say, but he didn't know if he had the strength to say it.
There is no need to apologize, Anakin. It was my fault for abandoning you. Obi-Wan wasn't ready, and I knew he wasn't. This is not your burden to carry. None of this should have come this far.
Vader nodded and turned around as he continued forward towards his vessel and got into the pilot seat. He sighed as he ignited the engines and turned the lights on, as the blue apparition of Qui-Gon Jinn vanished before his eyes. Anakin took his ship into space. Below his mask, yellow tint turned into ocean blue. Anakin was back. The ship carried Skywalker into space as he turned the hyperdrive on, and he was gone. As Anakin sat in the hyperspace, he focused on the Force. He became one with the Force, as it were. So much pent-up rage and anger and pain and suffering. It was all present, but Vader was no more. Now Anakin had to accept the Force as if he were living, because, as Master Qui-Gon explained it, it was. As it spiraled deep into deep space, Anakin moved his helmet off of his head and took in a deep breath with the charred and burnt lungs that he had left. He could hardly breathe, but then he focused. He became a vessel of the Force. For a short moment, he had no pain. It only lasted a split second, but Anakin realized how wrong he was to leave Mortis. Maybe his friends and everyone else would still be alive. A selfish decision, Anakin thought, as the ship crusaded through space. He focused again on the Force, relinquishing everything he had built up inside of him. Anakin knew that the only way to become one was to let go. If he could let go, he would be able to find Mortis and control the balance. Elsewhere in the galaxy, Sidious seethed in anger as he spoke to himself alone inside of the Senate chamber.
Lord Vader has betrayed me. He no longer sits on the cusp of evil. Where has that decadent fool gone? When I find him, I will execute him myself.
The Force was out of balance, still, but Anakin, being Anakin again, restored much of the cloud of darkness that shrouded the galaxy. Every being that could use the Force itself felt it. Jedi across star systems far and wide could feel the rapid change in the Force. Vader was no more, and while no one knew whether it was Vader or Sidious, they knew that the changing tides in the Force had been unleashed. The chance for redemption mere years after the fall of the Jedi Order was within the reach in the hands of the Jedi. They could come back. They could be in a galaxy and save it from its turmoil. And if they did return, they would be able to restore a true balance to the Force, especially if they mounted up against the evil Empire. Yoda was the first to feel it. He called out to Master Qui-Gon because he wanted to ensure that it wasn't a deception. In the previous years, Yoda had let go of the Force. While he could still use it exceptionally well, he had to let go of using it like he used to. Because if he tried to, just as Kenobi had every night for the past 2 years, Yoda called deep into the Force, concentrating, reconnecting himself to the true power of the Force. He retained, as much as he could, the role of Grand Master. Yoda called out,
Master Qui-Gon.
Yoda concentrated more and more. Dagobah was so strong with the Force. It was deep-rooted in the dark side, but Yoda knew how to take advantage and use it to propel his abilities. Yoda felt everything once again. He was now a part of the Force again, concentrating, and then he heard a voice of the late Qui Gon Jinn.
Yes, Master, it is true. There has been a change in the winds.
That it I have, Skywalker,
It is.
Return the Jedi must. To restore the balance, yes?
Yes, my friend.
Yoda got up from the grounds outside of his hut as he cleared some debris off a large metallic rock on the ground. It was the small pod he used to get here. Yoda walked inside after cleaning it up. It had enough fuel to get to Tatooine, the perfect place to go. There he would be able to find Kenobi, and the two of them would be able to return the galaxy to peace. Of course, Yoda had to make sure the ship would fly, so he spent a couple of hours making sure everything was fit and ready to go, before taking off and leaving behind his new home for a chance at redeeming the Jedi Order. Out in the far reaches of the galaxy, a ship pulled out of hyperspace. Anakin was lost, but not truly lost. If he used the Force as an ally, he could truly achieve what he had come here to achieve. Anakin still struggled with his breathing, deep breath after deep breath, with a few failed attempts here and there, but he was still alive. Anakin closed his eyes. He knew if he were able to succeed, he needed the trust in the Force. So, he closed his eyes, and the Force was flowing throughout him. He could feel it in every bone, every inch of flesh he had left. Anakin felt it. It was power. It was incredible. It was like being alive again, and then within an instant a large diamond began to pull the ship in, and Vader, no Anakin, was blinded by a bright light. Anakin awoke on a large green planet. He had been here before. The Ones. They brought him here during the Clone Wars, not so long ago. As he stepped out of his ship, he felt different. When he looked down, he wasn't covered in armor. Anakin ran over to a small pond. It was still day, and the light glimmered, and the world was filled with life. Anakin looked into the pond, and he saw white glowing limbs where his arms used to be. He then saw white glowing hair where his hair used to be. And then Anakin heard a voice from over his right shoulder, and then another from over his left. Anakin turned around expecting to see Qui-Gon, but instead, it was the Wills. They spoke in riddles, but the main point is that he had finally returned. There was so much that could be undone. The Wills took Anakin, and had him follow them. They could teach him about the living Force. They expressed every ounce of gratitude for him deciding to change his ways. On the other side of the Force, and in the living galaxy, Yoda waited inside of a small cave for the arrival of its owner. Yoda waited until the night when Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi returned from a long day at work. He saw the Grand Master and was surprised to see him. Master Yoda?
Master Kenobi, joy it is to see you.
Yes, Master. What are you doing here?
The change in the Force I felt. A possibility for change. Felt it, have you?
Yes, Master. What about it?
Turn Skywalker has. Redeemed in the Force. A chance we have to return the balance.
To kill Sidious?
Yes.
I'm a bit out of touch, Master. I buried my lightsaber years ago.
Reclaim you must. Reignite yourself with the Force, you shall.
Yes, Master, I will. As Obi-Wan departed into the desert to reclaim his lightsaber, Sidious could feel the changing winds in the galaxy. He knew that the Jedi would try and take advantage of the absence in power that Lord Vader created when he became Anakin Skywalker again. Sidious continued as he prepared himself for one more possible duel to end all duels. The one that would see the death of Yoda, and whichever other Jedi decided to show up on his doorstep trying to kill him. Sidious was enraged as he began consulting the dark side of the Force for power and for strength in his fight. He was so ready for it. On Mortis, Anakin was taken down into a room below the Father's room. Inside was a passage, a means to make things right. Of course, Anakin had never heard of it, nor had anyone else. Sidious was on the cusp of discovering the possibilities, but no one, other than the Wills and the Ones, knew of this world between worlds. Anakin was given passageway, a way to change things, with the promise that on the other side he would return to Mortis and cement his stay as the Chosen One, meant to bring balance to the Force. Anakin agreed to these terms, no matter how much he would hate having to say goodbye all over again. If it meant that Padme could live and Sidious would die, then he would do it. It would be worth it. Of course, he didn't have to. But what were the odds that he would face the same pain again from another rising evil in the galaxy? Anakin stepped through the door, into the world between worlds. He found himself an origin, a sound. He followed it. The curiosity of his mind and his memories as he found himself at the gateway to the past. Anakin looked in. He saw Windu, Sidious, and a room all too familiar with the beginning of his true suffering. Anakin didn't hesitate. He stepped in and replaced himself as he became Anakin Skywalker in the moment. The memories of the future still haunting him. Mace Windu still taunting him. Sidious still trying to corrupt him. Anakin stepped back, catching his breath, feeling what it was like to breathe without hesitation or without pain, feeling his ligaments and skin again, and his hair flowing down his back. He looked at Sidious, who pleaded with him. He then looked at Mace, who was confident that Anakin would not betray him. Anakin looked down at Sidious as Mace raised his blade. The oppression of the Sith was going to end here. Sidious cried out as Mace pulled his blade up, ready to kill, but then a blue lightsaber ignited, and the blade connected with Sidious's throat, killing the Sith Lord instantaneously. Mace looked at Anakin with shock on his face. He couldn't believe it. Anakin could have betrayed him and killed him, but didn't. This was the true making of a Jedi Master. Anakin looked at Mace Windu as he said,
You did well, Anakin. This is the true making of a Jedi Master.
Thank you, Master, but I have to decline. The Force requires me to be away. It requires me to sacrifice myself for the balance the galaxy needs.
What do you mean, Skywalker?
I lived a future full of pain and suffering, and because I trusted the Force, it did not become real. Give Obi-Wan my warmest regards. Anakin turned around and left the room, with Mace puzzled out of his mind. Anakin would make his way to Padme's residence and give her his love before telling her about everything he had just experienced. He told her that she would have 2 beautiful twins, and that if she ever needed him, she could find him through them, through their children. Anakin felt terrible about having to leave her behind, but the reality was that Anakin knew he had to sacrifice himself to the Force, so that nothing truly terrible would become of the galaxy or those he cared about. On the bright side, Anakin would be forever a hero. He would forever be the one that brought balance to the Force, and Anakin Skywalker would forever be remembered as the Chosen One. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to George Shore, Benjamin Wells, Jay Hoffman, Ward Pigman 308, Icy Raptor, Gort, and Chancellor Lawrence Sanders for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this so we can see what if Darth Vader raised and trained Ezra Bridger. If you want to see a what if down below, let me know. I do read all of your comments, but I don't do crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to support me in other ways. And let's try and hit the subscriber goal. We are shooting for 35,000 subscribers by July 31st at 11:59 p.m. If you guys can hit that, I'll be giving away one of these to one lucky winner. What you do is go down below, there's a doc on the pinned comment, you click on the doc, you write your name down below, and that's how you enter the giveaway. I'll do the giveaway, like I said, 35,000 subscribers by July 31st at 11:59 p.m. We're getting kind of close, so let's try and hit that goal. Anyways, let's talk about our story here. Now, I'm very happy with the story. I know not everyone likes the time traveling, and I do understand that. Time traveling gets really repetitive and it's annoying, and I think it's been overdone in other franchises. Let's just say that. I think Back to the Future did it, and then everyone else was like, oh yeah, we should do that too. And I think it gets kind of overused. While in Star Wars, it's kind of a new concept. The world between worlds is literally the only reason why we have an Ahsoka show. So, take it or leave it. It's kind of one of those things that people are like, I don't like it or I do like it, and I understand. I kind of feel the same way about it. But when I want to take advantage of it as a story, as a motive, and I don't want it to become an ex machina, which is not what I wanted it to be. And I usually try and tell it as a storytelling device, as a device of something. And the way I wanted to set that up here is the Force understands what it can do. The Wills, the Ones, they all know what the Force itself is capable of. And because Anakin is the Chosen One, Anakin has the opportunity to bring balance to the Force. The idea of this story was find yourself, right? Be true to yourself. And I always try and shoot for a deeper message, something that you can always take with you, something that can always inspire you in your own life. And I always try and make it come from one of the teachers or just through something that a character understands. And the lesson in this story was be true to yourself, right? Learn who you are and be that, Anakin has this choice to be Vader or to be Anakin. And I think on the cusp of everything, there's a comic series, and I'm not all that familiar with it, but I wanted to take and use little pieces of it here and there as I go, again, trying to make the story as much of my own as I can. And believe me, I do know that Qui-Gon spoke to Vader in either Legends or canon. I don't really care. I don't read about it. I didn't care about it. I'm just trying to tell a story here. And the story I wanted to tell was this. I don't want to tell something that's already been told before. Obviously, we know that it's happened before, or if you didn't know, it happened before. This is not what happened, obviously. I wanted to take advantage of it, and I wanted to use Qui-Gon as a very important storytelling device, right? And you heard him. You heard him talking, right? Also, if you guys want to be voice actors, hit me up on DMs on Discord. I do respond to DMs when you want to be voice actors or be a part of the team. But anyways, back to talking about the story. That just came up in my mind. But the fact is that the Force itself, the will of the Force, whatever have you, it would decide that, you know, Anakin is the one that's meant to bring balance to the Force. If he's going to bring balance to the Force, if he's going to remain on Mortis, if he's going to replace the father, the son, and the daughter, then he might as well. He might as well rectify things. I think of course it's far-fetched using time travel as a device, but again, it's always hard, and it's hard to keep original ideas, right? I want to keep doing original ideas. We are 80 videos in, 80-some videos in, right? And I have to keep making original ideas. So it's always a challenge, and it's always a fun challenge to shoot for that. I always want the story to be original. I want you to feel something new when you watch a new episode, right? I want it to be different. I want every story to be one of its own. I want it to make you think about it differently, right? I don't want every story, for those of you that are longtime viewers, to feel the same. And that's also why I've added writers to our team, because I want every story to feel different and have a different direction. And this one, I think, hit the nail on the head. Of course, the Mortis thing is kind of similar to the last episode, so apologies for that, but I really wanted Anakin to have a redemption that wasn't Return of the Jedi. I thought about it originally. Originally, I was like, when I was first trying the concept of this early in the morning, I was like, you know, maybe we'll have, you know, it'll just kind of fall into Return of the Jedi and just kind of go back in the canon, kind of like one of our other stories did. And I thought that was kind of fun, but, you know, 50-50. People like it, people don't. But then at a certain point, I was like, okay, we'll have this big battle scene and it'll be fun. And I was like, no. I'm kind of tired of big battle scenes. I want something special here. I want this to be a special ending. And I feel like I was able to approach that differently. I think we reached an ending differently, and I'm relatively convinced and happy with the ending of this, because it's something that you wouldn't expect. Because Qui-Gon is so in tune with the Force, and I think because of his deep roots and deep ties to the Force itself, I think Anakin, if he kept pressing the matter, if he kept talking to Anakin, and if he showed Anakin right in the moment where he was most vulnerable, when he was on Mortis, talking with the Sith Lord, if Qui-Gon was able to expose the Sith for what they were in front of the Sith without any chance of rebuttal, he would be able to turn Anakin. And that was the point of being on Mustafar with Lord Moment, is that the Sith only could dream of attaining immortality, right? Immortality was what Anakin wanted. He wanted to bring Padme back from the dead. And the only way he could achieve that is if he couldn't be there. The only way he could achieve that is that he would have to sacrifice himself. It's kind of spoilers if you haven't seen the last James Bond movie, but, you know, it's kind of like that. It's, you have everything. Everything is in your hands. You can have the wife, the kids. You can have that happy life you wanted, but you can't. The only thing is you can't. You can't. And it's tragic. It is a tragic, truly heartbreaking story. But Anakin will always be remembered as Anakin, not as Vader. And that was the happy ending that we wanted here. The happy ending is that he dies as Anakin. The happy ending is he disappears as Anakin. He doesn't die as Vader. He doesn't destroy the Jedi. He's Anakin. He's a hero. He is the chosen one. And that's why I wanted to end it like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I always like trying to give you a little explanation for some of the creative decisions I make at the end of these, so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. Some of you guys like them, some of you guys don't. It's up to you if you like them or not. But I always try and include this so that you guys that like knowing about how I create stories and like how I do stories, I try and keep these in. Regardless of that, let's hit the subscribe button and like the video. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.